So now we're going to cover the annual town meeting. We did the special. Just one thing I recalled when I did the special town meeting, it's 11,500 square feet of commercial retail space for 8 Pine Street, not 1,100. So I apologize for that, but it's 11,500. It's being proposed. So I just want to make that clarification. So we're going to talk about the annual town meeting. Again, June 20th, football field at the high school and/or gymnasium. Start at 9:30. The first article will be to hear reports of boards and officers and committees. This is a standard, almost a ratification, if you will, of the annual town report, which will be available for pickup when people register at town meeting and when they pick up their wristbands to vote. So that's Article 1. Article 2 deals with an appointment of the Nelson Park and Trust Memorial. So we have a person's name that'll serve for 3 years that we'll put before a town meeting and they will vote on it. Many of you who've been at town meeting on an annual basis know that these are kind of regular housekeeping items for Article 1 and 2. Article 3 is the amount of money that we will give to Blackstone Valley for their school district. It's $800,418,720. I'm sorry, 270. It's been a long day. I apologize. So that's their operating portion. That's how much we give to Blackstone Valley for education purposes. And then Article 4 is their interest in debt for a debt exclusion, which is $48,227. That is set to expire in 2025. It is debt excluded, so it's not like you can repurpose that $48,025, but it will be some small relief to taxpayers. And then Article 5, the FY21 budget. I will just remind folks, this had many iterative processes because there was a lot of pieces to this. And I will tell you that the Select Board and the Finance Committee have worked for a lot of months on the details relative to the budget. And we encourage folks to watch the meetings on demand at graftonma.gov or the town's YouTube channel. Incidentally, at the beginning of the broadcast here, we talked about a mailer that would go out to folks with some logistics. We will provide the YouTube channel for the town, and you can go watch those meetings that are on YouTube to learn more about the budget. It would take me a good hour to get through this here, so I'm just going to give you some highlights. Again, the budget is a $68 million budget, and I just want the community to know they look at this, they get an understanding of it and how we spend money. If you have questions before the 20th, another reason why we do these programs is please call us and get your questions asked and answered before you get to town meeting. I think that would be a great thing for all of us. So there is a lot of certainty under COVID-19. So the uncertainty really for us is local aid from the state of Massachusetts. In fiscal 21, we had an increase pre-COVID. We thought we were going to get about a 1% increase. I think we carried in our forecasting. And we just don't think we're going to get that. So we had a number that we had to reduce from pre-COVID to post-COVID, which we did that. So we are utilizing a combination of reductions in requested budgets and free cash and or stabilization to offset those reductions from the estimated increase in revenue. I just want to try to say that as appropriately as possible. And in doing so, we are being consistent with the financial policies of both the Board of Selectmen and of the Select Board, excuse me, and the Finance Committee. And that is in our budget document. So if you wanted to read through the reserves policy and what that money should be used for, we are being consistent with that as we go through. So I would also, since we don't know what state aid will be in fiscal 21, because we're having town meeting before we know that information, so we have some guessing work to do. We have incomplete information to make this decision about passing a balanced budget. We're always in this spot. We never know the final number from the state in any fiscal year. So we have town meeting in May. We may not see a budget signed from the governor until August or September. So we just don't know. Any adjustments we're going to have to make, we'll have to make in October. we've made significant adjustments, as you can see here on this slide. We break out by category the spending of the community in 9 different areas, really. General government, public safety, public works, the sewer department. It's unique because they raise their own fees and they're considered an enterprise fund. Health and human services, culture and recreation, education, unclassified, which is mostly health insurance for our employees, the 550 of them, and debt service. That's both debt excluded debt and debt service. It's funded by other revenue sources. So you can see the change. You can see the recommendation from the town administrator consistent with the charter. You can see the dollar change, the percent change. And then the last column is always, you know, I get teased a lot about this, to be honest with you, but the percentage of the budget and how it's broken up, this is really a good indicator of where you are at in terms of how, all the money you have and how you divvy that money up. And you can take this and compare it against other communities, and you'll see that we are either lower percentage-wise compared to our fellow communities, or at the same level. So general government, for example, to run the town day to day is 3.6% of the total operating budget. Public safety is 5% of the total operating budget. And that number, both those numbers, well, the first number, general government's contracted over the years. So we've had some reductions in different places and some increases in other places. But there's a lot of categories inside that general category that Finance Committee and Select Board get into those details with me and individual departments with. But anyways, Public Works is 4%. You can see the contraction there of 2.4% reduction year over year. The sewer department, again, they raise their own fees. They've been pretty stable for 10 years in terms of that $1 million, $1.1 million number. So there's really no growth inside of there. The same can be said for health and human services, culture and recreation. Education, there's been growth. There's been things that we wanted to do and had goals relative to education. So we have a strong commitment there. And you can see that that's true in this case with 56% of the budget overall for the schools, with an increase of $1.4 million. And then unclassified, we have health insurance costs. We do anticipate a 0% increase for active employees starting July, but I have retirees. I have 173 on a retirement plan, and that renews in January. So we need to, you know, account for what the increase may be there, and any additional qualifying events for employees. I have to cover that in this particular number, inside that $272,000 number. And then debt service, I mentioned this earlier, that, you know, it's mostly debt excluded, but other funds do offset those. But there is an increase to this number. I will say that the number is lower than what we were originally carrying, because we did a short-term borrowing for 1 year for the library proceeds. So we look to refinance that in May of 2021, and we will do that, and that number will obviously change again. But that percent, the dollar change, is lower than what it would have been if we did a long-term financing. So we have the total operating budget increase of 2.2 million, total increase of 3.6. And then we have this thing called non-appropriated expenses. So in 2014, we passed an override that consisted of money for the schools and the roads. That 1.5 has been consistent from 14 until now. There's no increase there. We have to account for state assessments. So we get state aid, but they also have charges on the back of that sheet. So we're using the governor's numbers. These are the numbers we have. It's a $78,000 increase from 20 to 21. And then the overlay reserve, this is for anybody who qualifies for an exemption for property taxes, can come into the assessor before February 1, I hope I'm right with that date, and potentially receive some tax relief from the Board of Assessors. So we look to increase that by $150,000 due to any anticipated, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, if the, I guess we're thinking in terms of if values go up exponentially or the tax bills rise because the override were to pass, we want to minimize the impact to the most vulnerable people in the community. So we want to have money set aside for those folks should they need it. And that's what this increase does. So if you have questions on that piece, you can call me, you can call the assessor, but I tried to do the best I could to explain that particular piece. TM raise and appropriate. So this is for the October town meeting. It's just anything that might fall through the cracks or come up between May and October. As you can imagine, we set a budget in May, normally not this year, for our fiscal year that starts in July. And July starts and we have, 4 months, 5 months before October hits. If we have to make adjustments, we hold out that money in case we have to make adjustments. And then BVT assessment, I covered that on a previous slide. There is an increase for BVT of $91,000 for their assessments. And this is directly related to a per pupil expenditure for kids who attend school. So their number could go up per pupil, which we would have to cover. But if we have more students going to school, obviously we're going to pay more for every child who goes to BVT. So that's the budget increase. This slide goes into the new revenue that we have for fiscal 21 and where that money goes. And there's a lot of things on here. So just take a minute just to kind of soak it in terms of where that money goes. But we can cover this at town meeting. You can certainly cover it with a phone call if you wanted to. Give me a call. There's a lot of data on this sheet, but it's a good way to kind of show how and where you've spent money over the years and where you're slated to spend money in fiscal 21. So this is just a slide that deals with total general fund expenditure from 8 to 19. Obviously that number is going up, but there's no spikes. It's just a nice gradual slope, which is a good thing to see. Both a function of the ability to pay and to budget appropriately for expenses. This is probably one of the most telling slides that we'll probably show you before we move off of this. When we did the override in 14, we had some estimates about what the growth would be and what the expenses would be for the town as a whole and what we were committed to and how much we would spend of the override. So I think this is an important piece because when you look at the information that was out in 14 for the override for fiscal 15, we talked about that number only sustaining us for a certain amount of time, basically 5 years. So 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, that's 5 years. We made it through 20. We're almost through 20 now. This was the actual slide we had relative to estimated what we would need. The bottom line is the excess or deficiency in the excess levy. So in 15 was 1.1, 16, 900, 17, 725, 18, 547, 19, 314. So we had excess levy. We used it in incremental fashion to fund the school department for those 5 years, which we did. And I would add, we probably did a pretty good job of managing expenses and contracting where we needed to get that 6th year out of the override, if you will. So we balanced 20 without having to do an override. We are considering an override for 21, as most people know. So I just wanted to cover this in terms of giving people a sense of, hey, what did we do from 14 until now with that override money? This was the projected plan, and we pretty much stuck to it. When you look at the actual overall results, this is where we actually stood after 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and even 20. Estimates are what they are. Actuals, you always can tell how close you were to the actual or the estimate when you get the actual. So I'm proud that we made it to this point. And some of the drivers here are relative to values of homes and commercial industrial property tax increases, because we've had significant in the past 3 years, the biggest growth in commercial industrial taxes than we've ever had before. So we are moving that needle ever slightly, but we are still moving it forward, diversifying where the tax dollars come from. So today, not a majority, but more tax dollars come from commercial industrial property than they did 2 years ago, for example. So those are all things that are kind of indicative of our growth mindset, our development team meeting approach, our economic development approach, our our availability to interact with businesses to attract them and have them invest. And homeowners do a majority of the investments in this community. So they fix up their houses, and we want to support that endeavor to grab that new growth through the assessor's office. So long story relative to the finances, but this is the actual results. So you can compare. I think we did a very good job. Relative to the average single family tax bill, again, I still think we're still in the thick of it. No one likes to pay taxes. I understand that. But, compared to our sister communities, if you will, based on land mass, budget size, kids in the school, all that stuff, these communities, in terms of the average single family tax bill, we're still doing pretty well in terms of not pricing ourselves out of the market. So we're still comparable with all those other communities. I think what's interesting on the next slide is relative income to these particular pieces. I don't know, Becca, if you have that slide.
This slide?
No, the slide that shows the income levels.
DOR reported income?
Oh, you had a line. It showed it as it related to income some other slide we looked at. You had a.
Yeah, I can get there.
Oh, yeah, I think it just passed it. All right. Well, I lost my thought process there. Anyways, so I'll kind of end with this, unless you want to add stuff, Becca, that I might have missed. But basically, we have reported income tax to the state of Massachusetts of in excess of $850 million. So as we look at these other communities, what they report for income, taxable income reported to the state, compared to the average single family tax bill, what this graph shows me that there's disposable income, if you will, over the tax burden for which they pay compared to others. Doesn't mean that we all have all we want, but in terms of filed income tax as it relates to everybody else, we have more and we pay less for the single family average tax bill than others. So, Becca, what else can I share with people that they might want to know?
I think that was good.
I will just, there's a contingent budget. If the override were to pass on the 23rd, the contingent budget in Article 6 basically looks at restoring all of the reductions that we made to balance given COVID-19. So when I started this long-winded discussion, we had revenues that were about 2.2 million new dollars that we would have to spend in fiscal 21 pre-COVID. Post-COVID comes along, and we estimate we're going to lose about $617,599. $617,000 is what we think we're going to lose. It could be more. I want to caution people that if state aid is reduced by 10%, which would be catastrophic, that's $1.2 million of a cut in revenue from fiscal 21. Being consistent, looking back at the policies that this community's developed in the past, we will look to reserves to carry us through for 1 year to get us through that hurdle if that were to happen. So I'm giving you a worst case forward-looking scenario, not having good information to make that decision, but at least if it happens, we have a proposed solution. So let's just deal with the here and now with the information we have. So the average, if the override were to pass and we restored all those things, it's important to note that all tax bills without an override are going to increase as a result of the levy growing in fiscal 21. So you pass a balanced budget in Article 5, that average single family tax bill is going to go up on average $286. There's no two ways about it. It's going to happen. If you pass an override and you use the money that we need to cover the reduction due to COVID and the additional money for the school department of $214,820, that's $818. The average increase, additional dollars they need to pay to cover that is $128 a year. We also have a capital stabilization portion of this override for 800,000. We have not proposed a plan around that. If we do, it'll be in October. We are sensitive to the fact that the economy is not perfect. Unemployment is extremely high nationwide. We haven't proposed to use any of that 800,000 that's associated with the override. But if we did come out with that plan and we coalesced around it and we did appropriate it in October, if the override were to pass, it would be an additional $123. But right now we're not proposing that. If we do, it'll be in October. So the total impact to taxpayers is $251. And then total increase to the, I guess this number is with both the capital, the additional 128 and the 286. That would be the total 537 average single family tax bill impact. Is that correct, Becca, how I have that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So this slide deals with the actual restoration of the reductions we made to balance the budget in Article 5. So we look to replenish those reductions in Article 6 as a contingency if the override were to pass. The reason why we're doing a contingent budget is because we don't want to have another town meeting after the override passes to allocate these funds. So we're just trying to be prudent and hedge against having to have a second override. So the override passes and this passes, all these things will be restored. If the override fails, you already have a balanced budget in Article 5, and you don't have to worry about anything except for the fallout of making reductions. But in terms of process and engagement of the community, taking action on the fiscal 21 budget, it will be done until October. And if we need to make adjustments because further reductions came from the state, we'll make those reductions in October. And I'll just say this, this is the policy I was referring to earlier. In our town meeting is the appropriating authority for all of the funds and all the projects that we do. So it's important to note that we don't do anything without an appropriation. So the town meeting holds so much power and so much authority over this matter. So we don't just, we manage day to day. So if we found out 10 days after town meeting that state aid was reduced, we would take action fiscally not to spend the money we know we're not going to have. In anticipation of getting to town meeting in October, we wouldn't spend those dollars. We would make cuts and cut back from our operation somehow, some way to align until we can get to town meeting. I guess that's the reason why you have a charter and why you have a CFO position and then you have a superintendent of schools. We manage that until you can have an appropriate town meeting. So what I'm hoping people take away is it just doesn't, you don't set it and forget it and walk away. There are people here managing the day-to-day costs and looking at revenue and making sure things are balanced. For example, if you look at the revenue for 20, when this fiscal year ends, we will exceed our expenses. We will take in more money than we spent, which is a good thing. That's what you want. And that's what yields a fund balance. And that's what yields free cash. And that's what gives you a robust capital plan that you'll vote on in the next article. So I threw this slide together, back up one, Beck, relative to the financial policies that are in the budget. And we just took this policy and condensed it. This is, if you look at the purpose, why we have this, why we want to safeguard municipal funds and protect town assets, the select board and the finance committee coalesced around this proposal. It talked about adhering to the proposal using certain objectives that are set out in best practices relative to fiscal management of a municipality. And also a section about reserves. And I think this is what I'm relying on when I talk about the future cuts, should they be made. We would look to this policy to see what we should do next. And of course, it's subject to town meeting approval, and I can't stress that enough. But the reserve funds should serve for temporary financing for unanticipated or unforeseen extraordinary needs of an emergency nature and unexpected liability created by state or federal legislation, funding of previous fiscal year expenses, immediate public safety or health needs, opportunities to achieve long-term cost savings or planned capital investments in related debt service. This is what's important to me. This is kind of like the guiding principle of the collective financial elected and appointed bodies. This is what would govern my thinking moving forward if there was a state aid reduction that was significant to the tune of 10%, but we just don't know what that is. The other side of that is if we make those reductions ahead of knowing that, those reductions you can never rebuild. Whether it's a town or a school side reduction of $1 million, it's catastrophic. So I was here in 2009. I know what the 9C cuts were. I know what state aid happened relative to the recession. We made it through. We had a really substantial turnback, as a matter of fact, because we managed those costs and managed our revenue. We had a turnback at the end of that that was very, very significant for both the town and the school. So we can get through this. It's a very difficult place for us to be, but you've gotten through worse, maybe not worse, but you've gotten through some very bad times, and we will get through this. There is no doubt, because you've taken the time to create policies and employ people who are paying attention and doing the next right thing. So I just want to, at least give people some confidence in the fact that we're here, we're paying attention, and we're being judicious with the money that the taxpayers allocate on an annual basis. So again, I can't stress enough that I want people to call us and ask questions. We're happy to do that, or email if you're shy to pick up the phone, but we're here and we'll respond accordingly. So Becca, is there any other pieces I should cover with the contingent budget?
No.
Okay, Article 7 is really a housekeeping item, but it's required by the state. So we have a franchise fee for both Charter and Verizon. They give us a franchise payment every quarter. We have to vote on a budget annually for Grafton cable television, and we will do that in accordance with state law. So Article 8 is the capital expenditure budget. So our plan is for 1.1 million. A few of these items used in that 1.1 million are for leases. We decided to adopt a strategy of not spending all of the free cash at once on any one item. We looked to lease them because financing was attractive enough with interest rates being as low as they have been. So we decided to just take a portion of the free cash and put it towards debt service, if you will, for those leases. So we have about $331,000 of articles that have been passed at previous town meetings that we would look to close out. And we would use free cash to the total of $794. So those combined, closeout articles and the use of free cash to fund the FY21 capital plan of $1,125,000, we would still have a balance of free cash of $1,016,042. The items to be funded, the leases, I think, have asterisks next to them for those particular items. This can be found on the website. It's part of the budget book. I'm not going to bore you with that. I'm trying to think if there's anything unique in here. The perpetual care sale of lots for the public works cemetery 1-ton dump truck could be an item to be explained. If people had questions on that, we can certainly do that. But this is the document. This is what we will vote on at town meeting. Transportation bond bill, we get money from the gas tax from the state of Massachusetts, usually around $500,000, $497,000, something like that. So we have to vote to appropriate that money that'll come in for that purpose. And the next article will deal with accepting contracts from contractors to be able to spend that money. So they'll go hand in hand, both Article 9 and 10. Revolving accounts. These are straightforward housekeeping items. There's no new ones here, but it basically lists out the revenue source, who's authorized to expend, and what those funds can be expended for. So these were established in previous town meetings, but every year you need to reset the limits. The limits have not changed. They're governed by state law, but you have to show the Department of Revenue that you have these voted on an annual basis. Article 12 is the Recreation Department revolving account. We're just looking to, instead of sweep the money they get on an annual basis into programs for recreation, we want some of that money to stay behind in order to help them run more robust programs. Becca, you've worked with Jen exclusively on this. Do you want to talk in more detail about that?
No, I just want to clarify that the dollars that do get swept or have been swept in previous fiscal years are not anticipated revenues. So this is not going to affect revenue moving forward. They're kind of typically in the past, they've been just sort of gravy on top. So this will allow a recreation department to continue to enhance programming and opportunities for youth and adults throughout town by keeping some of those dollars that they get from programming and keeping them in the recreation department's control for future programming.
I think it's important that you mentioned that, because that revenue obviously is important to figure out what our revenue stream is for the next fiscal year. But, you know, the gravy part, we can guess and we can hope, which aren't good strategies. That's why we don't include them in our revenue estimates. So if we have it, we get to run this program. If we don't, we don't. But we don't look to the general fund to offset those costs, but we don't use them in our revenue estimates because we just don't know what the participation level will be. Nor do we necessarily know what those contracts for those vendors who provide those services will be. So I don't want someone to think that, well, you don't realize the revenue, you don't budget for it. If you budgeted for it, you would have more of it. It's, you know, it's not that simple. So I just wanted to make that clear. So article, and again, with questions that folks have, Article 13, we look to pass over. Did I skip 14? I'm sorry. Yeah, 14 is a housekeeping item that allows the treasurer collector to borrow money from time to time. We do it every year. It does need, obviously, the approval of the select board as well. So there's fail safes. The treasurer collector just can't borrow money on her own. So I'll make that point clear to folks as well. Self-funded for Article 15, we are self-funded for unemployment. We do not pay the 1% tax. We just pay as we go. Unfortunately, the state of Massachusetts is pretty liberal in terms of what they allow for people to make claims against. And we have a company that we work with that will fight claims if people were discharged for negligence or for cause. And we'll fight those if they try to get unemployment where they should not. So we do that, but we still have people that the state of Massachusetts allows them to collect, and we have to pay that bill. So that's what that covers. 16, WRTA, basically these funds are utilized to provide transportation to the seniors throughout the town. So if you see a blue RTA bus and you see a Grafton white bus funded by the Friends of Grafton Elders, that blue bus is funded with RTA funds. So it's not a direct, that person would work for us, but they, you know, the money comes from WRTA to provide local transportation to disabled and the elderly. The police department in Article 17, these are requests that were in the operating budget. We had to balance that budget in Article 5 and 6. So we pulled those items out that were close to capital, but were really needed for the operation of the police department. So we look to have $12,000 for radios be included in this article for that purpose. And I'll just mention this relative to managing the operation. Having this in a separate article, we really get to control the timing and how money gets spent. And the same with capital. You have $1 million in capital being spent. If we don't spend it, we can use it to liquidate, like we're doing the $331,000. We can reappropriate that money in the worst case scenario come October if reductions were to be bad. So we don't know that piece, but we have a lot of different programmatic things we've been trying to do to make the community better, but we can stop doing some of those things if there's some foundational things we need to consider and shore up. And this would be one of those types of things, for example. So 18 is the fire department. Again, same scenario. you know, these guys volunteer, they serve us extremely well and do great work, and to not fund these items is just, it's derelict in my opinion. So we have to get this in there. We have to, you know, use free cash to buy these items to keep those guys safe who give us great service. So you know, I'm not supposed to advocate, but I'll tell you that there's no greater fear than running into a burning building or trying to pull someone out of a rolled over vehicle. So I want to take a moment to appreciate the work they do, and let's give the department what they need in this particular instance. Article 19 is the request from the town to town meeting to have the ability for the select board to dispose of 27 Upton Street. We've had a number of studies done around 27 Upton Street. It's the old DPW garage. The new DPW garage on Westboro Road is going to open. Oh, Westboro Road, I apologize. You know, before the summer's over, sooner than later. All of our gas tanks are up there. Everything's up there from an infrastructure standpoint. And this particular land is right across the fire station, diagonal across from the soon-to-be-built library. We have the post office. It's a gateway into the community. So this white building labeled 27 Upton Street has been there a very long time and needs a lot of attention. And we need the ability to sell it and make a good use out of it. We did receive a grant to do a study and do wetlands delineation around the site to find its highest and best use and get this land back on the tax rolls. Much like 8 Pine Street, we would employ a similar feature if we were allowed to sell it. We would go out to bid. We would tell the bidders what we think should go here based on the strategic plan, the visioning study that we did, and the zone change, which hopefully will ensue in the next article, will all culminate to make this a viable project for both additional housing and commercial space on the lower levels. And we'll show you some pictures of what that means. But we need permission to sell it. And then the next article, in Article 20, we want to change the zoning based on the studies we've done for its reuse and repurpose. So we had this Gateway Master Plan done in June, and I don't know why we changed the date to June 3, but we did this proposal many, many months ago. But regardless, but this was a partnership between the state mass development and the town of Grafton. So this is the property and how it's shaped. We look to rezone all the parcels in the middle. It's really up zone, if you will. You know, right now it's all residential. We would make it commercial mixed use or village mixed use that would allow more uses. The uses that are there can stay there without any problem. But if someone wanted to pull together one whole parcel with one whole development along Upton Street, they could certainly approach those private owners and make their separate deals to make it work. But for us, we want to allow for a zone change for this parcel in green to village mixed use and allow both commercial and residential retail to go on this parcel. So we had some renderings. We showed a lot of pictures to the community about this and how it would look. This is one of them conceptually. Obviously, nothing's engineered, but this is what we envision it could look like. That's what we want to see it look like in the future. So that was 20. So 21 is North Street. We're going to ask the town accept this 17 acres. There's no cost to the town. It's a donation of land. We want to keep it as open space, and Recreation and Conservation have been there, been on site, walked the site along with Parks and Cemetery. And we want to just hold this land for open space and passive recreation. And this is kind of the detail of how it lays out. And then Lottie Drive. Becca, you want to handle this one?
Sure. So this is just a strip of property on Lottie Drive that was owned by the town, and when it was purchased, the strip was inadvertently conveyed to the original purchaser of that lot. The house is being sold, and the new buyer has recognized the mistake from the previous owner and is asking to convey the strip back to the town. So there's no financial impact to the town. It's really just getting this strip of land right on the books, so to speak.
All right. And then what are we on Article 23? We'd look to pass over Article 23 at this point. This is more of a housekeeping item and a placeholder. And then 24 through 29 are all CPC reserves. We know that the CPC's funds can only be used for specific designated purposes. It's above and beyond the tax bill that was voted a number of years ago for a 1.5% surcharge to be used for historic preservation, affordable housing, open space, and recreation. So those are the purposes which the money can be used for. People make application, or organizations or the town makes application to CPC for various projects. They hear them, they discuss them. Those projects come back to town meeting for an appropriation from these particular funds. So I'm not going to cover these in detail for 29 through 24, or 24 through 29. John Stevens is the chair, but if people have questions about any of these articles, we can certainly get you in touch with John, or I'll try to answer them as best I can. So Article 30 is a citizen's petition. We don't normally speak about citizens' petitions. 31, citizens petition, again, closely related subject matter. We won't opine on that. Another citizens petition is for 32. And CPC-SUPERPARK. These are existing funds that we had earmarked. Well, we have existing funds that were earmarked through a previous town meeting for overlay and abatement reserves that we released from the assessor's office we put to this purpose. So we're looking for a multi-phased approach for a park and open space recreation area. So for what we call the super park, because that's what was taken down when we built the high school. This appropriation would provide $250,000 of additional dollars to complete phase 1 for that. And then the next article is tied to that, and I'll get into the details of what the money would be spent on in a moment. But there are a lot of Recreation Commission meetings and CPC meetings that discuss this matter, so people can watch it on their own and get an understanding and grasp for it. And again, if you have questions after you do that, you can certainly come back. The picture up now just looks at, you know, the playground equipment and how this would lay out. Again, we did a study for a master plan, knowing that the library was going to be built. We did not want to interfere with the construction of the library, and we didn't know where their parking lot would end and where we should start ours for the park. But just historically, the town bought and was trying to buy, even before I got here in 2008, the Peralt land behind the library, and they were unsuccessful. I think we closed on that 2011, 2012 for a significant reduction in cost. And we just held that land knowing that someday we would use it for something. So this is what the something was based on previous super park committees of their preferred location. So this is where we landed. Some people disagreed with the location, but this is ultimately where we decided to go. Complementary uses for the library, and have a full day event at the library or here, or vice versa, in and out of both locations. It makes a lot of sense from a standpoint of having a community center right outside the common with the library and having some recreation for some children. It just makes a lot of sense from the study standpoint and from the feedback we got from the community. So that's why we're looking to move forward with it. So the piece of this that's important is the $700,000 that we look to borrow using CPA money is, you know, part of what we talked about in Article 24 through 29. CPA funds can only be used for certain things. This $700,000, which will be borrowed over 10 years, will be part of the designation from the CPA funds. I will tell you that the open space component for borrowing happened with the PELL farm, and they're paying notes on that now, and you'll see that at town meeting where they authorize the payment of the bonds for Pell Farm. So if you think of it in terms of the major areas for borrowing, they've dealt with open space, they've dealt with historic preservation with One Grafton Common, and now they're dealing with parks and recreation. With this borrowing, the next one would be logical, would be affordable housing, which we could do that next. And you'd still have, even after you make all these bond payments for all these things, you still have $225 to $250 each year to fund any other project in any other category. And the CPA has been great about doing outreach work and finding out what the community wants to see those monies spent on. So those monies would be available in every subsequent year, even with the borrowing of the $700,000. So a lot of information with what I just said. Again, if you have questions, we need you to call us and we can walk you through it in a more, I don't know, slower fashion, I guess. So perpetual care for the cemetery. These are funds we take from sale of lots, basically, that we set aside. We have 3 accounts and 3 cemeteries. We want to use the money to buy a brush mower to be able to handle the big areas and swaths of land we have at each cemetery. So the purchase price of that is about $40,000. So we want to use the perpetual care money to buy that particular item and provide that service. In 36 and 37, these are both water district hydrant acceptance. We budgeted for these in the operating budget that you passed in Article 5, but we do have to go through a process of accepting them. Citizens petition for this next one for Article 38 speaks for itself. The petitioner will have to speak to that as well. 39 is another citizen's petition. The petitioner can speak to that themselves. And 40, this is a citizen's petition, and they will have to speak to this themselves, but I will tell the body, even at town meeting, that as of right now, the conditions to accept the road from a planning board, public works perspective is not ready to be accepted yet. So we would ask the body to reject this until all those requirements are met. So to say that, so everybody knows that that's where we are as of today. And then 41 is 25 Worcester Street, petitioned article, and the petitioner can speak to that directly. And I think that is it. I just want to reiterate that the 20th, we're covering a lot. It's a difficult time because of the pandemic. We are taking steps to social distance, to check people in efficiently, to count votes effectively. There are a lot of things that the moderator's doing, the town clerk's doing, that my office is doing to make this safe and to make this go off without a hitch. But so far it's moving forward. We do have a rain date for Sunday, the next day. If it rained both days, the moderator will make a decision about when to reconvene that meeting. But the goal is to be safe with the secondary goal of continued governance through a democratic process of town meeting. So that's the goal. And we want you to be efficient with your time and don't want to waste any time. So if you can hear this or you see this, please share this video and call us or send us emails with questions so we can get you information that helps you make a better decision. Again, we appreciate your time and we thank you for listening and watching. Becca, is there anything we should close with?
Please ask questions, email us, call us, and we're happy to have conversations about any of the information provided herein or any other questions that people might have related to town operations.
No, oh yeah, that's all good. Yeah, that is awesome. Everybody, we thank you. Be safe. One thing I didn't mention, it's obvious because I didn't, there will be chairs provided at town meeting, both in the gymnasium and on the field. So there'll be chairs. If you have to bring an umbrella because you want to be outside and you don't want the sun on you, the moderator will probably have you sit back in the back row. So you should just know that that might be the requirement for those folks bringing an umbrella. We want people to come early. We will have a video that'll demonstrate where people should go to register, and the clerks and the registrars are working hard to get the poll pads up and running and get them to be Wi-Fi enabled, so you can check in with an ID. You do not need an ID, but if you want to make it quick for everybody else, if you just put your license on the backside of this poll pad device, it'll check you in, you'll get a wristband, and you'll be escorted on your way to the field to participate in town meeting. So again, we appreciate your time and listening, and please give us feedback with questions. We appreciate your time. Thank you.